In this video, we will take a look at indexing and slicing with a tuple. As we saw with strings and lists, indexing with tuples begins with 0. Let's think back to the tuple that we created in the previous video, where we had a string of Dublin, Ireland, an integer of 6.5 million, a string of Europe, and a tuple containing float coordinates. Dublin is at index 0, Ireland at index 1, 6.5 million at 2, and so on. We can also index going backwards. This is going from the last element in the list. If we see our coordinates there, they are at -1. Europe is -2, 6.5 million is -3, and so on. The same rules apply with strings, lists, and tuples. When using forward indexing, the maximum index that can be used is the length of the tuple -1. When we use backward indexing, the minimum negative index is the negative of the length of the list. Let's throw up the PyScripter and check out indexing and slicing with a tuple in Python. Let's take the tuple we created in the previous video. This was our attributes variable, and we set it to equal a tuple that contained a string Dublin, a string Ireland, an integer of 6.5 million, a string Europe, and a tuple containing two values that are both floats. We'll hit enter. As we know, indexing in Python is 0 based. So if we want to access the first element of our tuple, we use our variable name. Now you might be inclined to think, because it's a tuple, we need to use parentheses here, but it is still the square brackets notation. We put in 0, hit enter, and we are returned Dublin. What if we wanted to return the integer of 6.5 million? This is at index 0, 1, 2. So we need to use index 2. And we are returned our integer. We'll do one more at index 4. And we can see we are returned our tuple containing our latitude and longitude values. That was forward indexing. We can also use backward indexing. If we use -1, we will get the last element of the tuple, which is of course our coordinates. -2 is the second last, so we returned Europe. And there are 5 elements in this list, so we can go up to -5 to return the first element of the list. From strings and lists, we should be quite comfortable with using indexes to access individual characters or objects. Let's take a look at slicing. We'll call our attributes variable, and we'll use our square brackets. When it comes to slicing, we are going to provide a start index and an end index. It is important to note that the end index is not returned, it is the end index -1. Let's think about that. If we put in a start of 1 and an end of 4, what are we going to be returned? Index 1 is where Ireland sits. Index 4 is the last element in our list. You might expect it to return a tuple of all 4 of those elements, but in fact it is going to return the end -1, which is Ireland, 6.5 million, and Europe. Let's take a look. We'll add in 1 for the start and 4 for the end and hit enter. And we can see we are returned a tuple containing our 3 elements. For a string, you are returned the characters. For a list, you return the list. And for a tuple, we are returned a tuple. If you want to return the entire tuple, you do not supply any indices and hit enter. We get our full tuple. We do not need to provide a start index. By default, Python will fill in 0. So if we omit the start and we'll put in 4 for the end, we can see we will return from the start up to the 4th index -1. We can also omit the end and just put in the start. We'll put in 2 as the start and we'll leave out the end. It'll take from element at index 2 right the way to the end of the tuple. As with strings and lists, we can also perform stepping. So along with our start and end, we add in another colon, and there is a step value, which is an integer. Let's show an example of stepping. We'll create a new tuple called nums and set this equal to our parentheses and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Hit enter. We'll now call our nums variable and our square brackets. We won't use a start and we won't use an end, but we're going to use a step of 2. We'll hit enter and we can see that all our odd numbers were returned, but these odd numbers sit at even indexes. We will return the first index of 0 and then every even index going forward. So 1 is at 0, and then we have index 2, 4, 6 and 8. We'll finish up by showing what happens if we add in an index greater than the length of the tuple minus 1. Let's get the length of our nums tuple. We'll use the built-in length function and we'll take a look at built-in functions later on in the course. We get 10. There are 10 elements. Let's call our nums variable again. And inside our square brackets, we're going to call the len function and put in nums. We know this returns 10. So this is basically going to return nums 10. When we hit enter, we get an error that the tuple index is out of range. If we put in -1 after our length function, we will get the last element from our tuple. In this video, we walked through indexing, slicing and stepping with tuples. There was very little new there other than that we were using a tuple rather than a string or a list.